since the release of Red Dead Redemption 2. The chapter of Guarma has been an interesting point of contention. It's a chapter that feels as if it derails the game for some, a notion that's only solidified when it came to light much of Guarma's original plans were cut, adding more to the consensus of perhaps this whole section really wasn't necessary at all. While to others, Guarma is an extremely important chapter, a vital time of breathing space for the gang after failing to successfully rob the Bank of Saint-Denis, adding time to us as players to really sit and think about the consequences awaiting the gang once they do somehow manage to return to the rest of the gang members, and most important of all, the environment, climate, stress, lack of water, sleep, and just about everything else Arthur's critically needs is deprived from him. All of these are compounding factors that accelerate the deterioration of his health to a point of no return. A critical component within really not just Arthur's story, but the story of the Van der Linde gang as a whole. On a more personal level, Guarma is the turning point for Arthur. For the first time in his life, he witnessed an aspect of his father he never thought he'd ever witness, killing a woman in cold blood. Now in the past, I've heard people get riled up hearing this woman was killed in cold blood, pointing out how she in fact pulled a knife out on Dutch demanding more gold, and hence Dutch never killed a woman in cold blood, but rather defended himself from a native woman who turned on him, knew he planned on mounting a rescue mission against the local authorities, and was aware of who he was, possibly had knowledge of how to track him back to whatever camp he was hiding in deep within this beautiful jungle, and so she was hence a dangerous liability. Well, today we're going to be addressing that topic because I think it really isn't just Dutch's actions, but what he says and how he defaults into selling an abstract idea, which given the current circumstance surrounding this old woman's death at the hands of Dutch, felt completely unnecessary to Arthur, so much so that he directly questioned Dutch.
You got no idea, Arthur. No idea at all. I will do whatever it takes for us to survive. I guess that's what I'm afraid of.
Now, things don't happen as just isolated incidents. Arthur doesn't just see Dutch as a completely different person out of the blue, but instead begins to identify a pattern forming within Dutch. Such a pattern can be traced all the way back to Blackwater, and the ferry job that kicked off the story of the game. Now, this event is later referred to as the Blackwater Massacre, thanks in part to the massive amounts of death and bullets shared from both sides. Dutch's actions on that ferry were unfortunately never witnessed by Arthur or us as players, but we do hear about it from various sources.
Do you remember Hattie McCourt's face? Who? She was a girl Dutch Van der Linde shot in the head on that raid on the ferry a few years back. Same one you got shot on.
You were there, Javier. What really happened on that boat?
Dutch killed a girl in a bad way, but it was a bad situation.
That ain't like him, though.
As with all witness accounts and hearsay, there are differences in perceptions in how it all went down, but the bottom line was, it didn't really feel as if Dutch had to kill the woman on the ferry, who would later be identified as Hattie McCourt. Her death wasn't just senseless though, it was referred to as brutal and extremely uncharacteristic of Dutch. Those closest to him finally seeing a different version of their charismatic and warm Dutch to in fact harbor a side that completely disregarded the value of another person's life. At Shady Belle, there's a moment where Arthur can finally hear from John on his feelings and thoughts on everything surrounding Heidi's killing.
We're fighters, I know, but sometimes I start thinking about that girl. Well, Javier knows what we saw and it weren't pretty. Ask Micah. Although he encouraged it, weren't pretty at all. I just hope Dutch was right when he said that we had to do it to survive. Sometimes you just gotta do really bad things, I guess.
It's an unnervingly human side of John who shares the whole ordeal just felt wrong. He can't stomach thinking about it, and Micah was another witness, although his thoughts may differ than John's and Javier's because he was the one to encourage it. But when he says Dutch justified the killing by having to do it for their survival, and that it takes the ugliest things imaginable for the greater good, recontextualizes a lot of Dutch's pattern and behavior. Now, I didn't want to focus too much on Blackwater as we never see it for ourselves, but I wanted to point that out, especially because that first killing is always cited as Dutch's first slip of the mask, at least the first major slip up. The next one is Bronte.
The law will find you. Already, the dogs are on the way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're right. You are so right. They are good at smelling filth, huh? So filth has got to be This your friends, the Pinkertons, gonna come and rescue you? You repulsive little maggot! Call them now! You call them!
Angelo Bronte is unique because he does in fact identify as a major threat. He has a city of Saint Denis politicians in his pockets. He has men within the police force on his payroll. Has proven to have a whole underground network of children working as thieves and spies for him, and on top of all of that, do we need to mention his own private security force? Now there is an argument to be made that Angelo Bronte on some level had to go. This logically made sense to Arthur after all, who even sided with Dutch's reasoning against Hosea, who advised to just leave Bronte alone. To Dutch, and that's to Arthur, it made sense that if they're going to be hitting the Saint Denis Bank in what is essentially Bronte's city, it makes sense to take him out as a preemptive strike to ideally hand a major blow to the face of the overall resistance the gang would meet within the city. So killing Bronte was never really the issue. It was the manner in which Dutch killed him. Drowning is extremely personal, and he's berating Bronte in addition to taunting him. Call the Pinkertons, call the people who you claim have so much power and represent what this country really is now, and have fun calling them with the final gasps of air you have. That's assuming they can even find you from inside the belly of an alligator. Bronte's death is much more justified, but the way he's killed is what shows Arthur and John Dutch is different. That alleged killing of a woman on the Blackwater ferry, so out of Dutch's character, now given Bronte's death, appears to have a little more credibility. Dutch here shows that he can and will lose himself if unchecked, especially when understanding moments before that Bronte did everything he could to remind Dutch he is nothing and has little control. The wound that he slowly opened from the insult at the mayor's house to then blatantly tearing that wound open by setting Dutch up with a trolley station job and now going the extra mile to pour a little salt in that wound sends Dutch over the deep end. Bronte here reminds him he has little control. He reminds him law's coming, they'll find him in no time, and the clock is working against him. It's all just a matter of time. He can sit there and be comfortable and think that everything is going his way, but things are much worse than he can ever hope to tell himself, and in fact, Bronte can prove it by offering Dutch's own men a chance to earn $1,000 if they kill Dutch and set Bronte free. Understanding these two major slip-ups, these two killings, from the point of claiming having to do it out of a need for survival, while showing Dutch is not in full control of even himself in these moments, are vital, particularly for Arthur when it comes to what happens in Guarma.
She was gonna betray us, Arthur. Couldn't you tell? No. Well, I got some Spanish. She was.
You sure you're alright, Dutch?
I'm just trying to make sure that some of us survive, Arthur. Now, shall we proceed?
Let us play devil's advocate for a second and side with Dutch. The woman had to go for the audacity of holding him at knife point, demanding more gold. Dutch claimed it was all he had at that point, and since he had nothing left to give, you might as well take her out, especially since the risk of letting her go is far too great, whether if she went to the authorities or another group willing to attack out of opportunity or personal resentment for one reason or another. It's just too careless of an act when the gang is in a horribly vulnerable position, and Javier's rescue is the highest priority. She would be the ultimate loose end that they cannot afford at this point in time. Fine, killing her covers the tracks. Fine, the brutal way of slowly and menacingly walking up to her, wrapping his hands around her throat and banging her head up against the ladder was nothing personal or anything that he enjoyed or was compelled to do, but rather utilized whatever he could in that moment to tie up said loose end. I think we can all come up with justifications and simple yet ugly explanations, but what's hard to defend is Dutch's claim of knowing Spanish.
Dutch? What are you doing? Jesus! Easy, Dutch. What was that?
Horrible old crone.
But you killed her.
She was gonna betray us, Arthur. Couldn't you tell?
No.
Well, I got some Spanish. She was.
You sure you're alright, Dutch?
It's very funny, but it is what ends up breaking the trust Arthur had here. If you watch the cutscene in its entirety, and disregard her actions for just a quick second, Dutch claims she was going to betray them, asks if Arthur was able to recognize that, and when he says no, Dutch calms the doubt by claiming he knew Spanish. So if you can't see it with interactions that justifies the outcome, well, that's perfectly fine, because Dutch could interpret it in the language she didn't think they understood, making up for that gap that Arthur seemed to miss in her alleged actions. Before they ascend the ladder, Arthur questions him one more time if Dutch is okay, and Dutch tells him he's just trying to make sure they survive. Arthur doesn't say another word, but his face clearly says what he's thinking. He doesn't know the person he's looking at. The shock is still there. Clearly, Arthur still does not believe him, and when they ascend the ladder, he does give Dutch yet another opportunity to really put his doubts and worries at ease. However, what I want to quickly point out here is as Arthur ascends the ladder, Dutch does another one of his tactics that he has done throughout the game. He clears his throat, attempts to compose himself as if to make himself look as if he's in control of the situation, calls Arthur his son, and caters to Arthur's own logic.
I guess. Listen, son, you think I want any of this?
I don't know.
Of course I don't.
Does Arthur think Dutch really wanted any of this? It's ugly, but he made a pledge to them all they will survive. So here Arthur asks one more time, how did he know Gloria was going to betray them? What did she say?
So how did you know she was gonna betray us? What'd she say?
It was in her eyes, in the way she was leading us.
But you said you knew Spanish.
I know human beings, Arthur.
Well, maybe we've all just gone rotten.
Arthur looks away in disbelief and says what he's thinking. Maybe they've all just gotten rotten. And maybe he can see it for the first time in a long time, perhaps in his whole life. He was just blatantly lied to. Does Dutch take him for a fool? He clearly wasn't given enough time to properly think over a response, and this explanation of it being in her eyes and the way she was leading them over actually knowing Spanish as he said that he did originally, completely removes any justification he had on the grounds of understanding her. Now, if we were to play devil's advocate for Dutch again, it seems as if he just wants to get over this topic and focus on the rescue mission, leaning on knowing people and just doing his best in the situation he's given. But he's caught. For us, this entire cutscene and interaction between Arthur, Dutch, and Gloria alone repeats the core tenets of Dutch's reasoning for the killings that upset the ones closest to him. It's always us versus them, a survival situation where Dutch has no choice. He doesn't like it and it's ugly, but he made a promise for his son and the family that is the Vanderlyn gang to be safe and sound. All of this is piled up on an old woman who may or may not have been a threat. Should we also point out that Dutch doesn't bother picking up the gold bar that he gave to Gloria? Or what about pointing out that he and Arthur are both twice her size, arguably in much better shape and better armed? The two of them could have easily overpowered her. So, would it have made more sense or been a little bit more beneficial for Dutch to just let things play out, rather than literally take matters into his own hands and risk destroying the image that Arthur had of him, his most loyal and trusted gunman? I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but for me, Gloria strangled senselessly isn't wrong. I think hearing someone say it like that makes it easy to misinterpret. That's not an insult or a jab at anyone, so please don't take it as such. It's just from my perspective, it's more the personal and brutal nature of her strangulation and Dutch's sloppy attempt at justifying it through blatantly lying, to only get caught in that lie a few moments later. And in life, trust is very akin to glass. Once it's broken, shattered, fractured, you can try to mend it back together, but it's always double or triple the amount of effort to rekindle what was broken, and even then it's never really to the point of where it was before being broken. With the collapse of the Vanderlyn gang, Arthur's health, and Dutch's shifting plans and priorities, the trust, love, and respect from Arthur to Dutch or vice versa after Guarma never reaches the same level as it was prior